Okay, I am talking to somebody who I've been bugging, Adam Nedeff. Adam, the book, tell everyone the Gong Show book that we've been waiting for is finally here.
Yes, it's called Gong This Book. It's been a 5-year work in progress for me, but it's finally on sale at Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And as of this morning, the paperback and the Kindle version have bestseller status
As
on
well it
Amazon.
should.
So it's been a real feather in my cap. Yeah.
I will tell you, I'm a fan because I said a few things. When you said the name Jamie Farr, I
Oh
said
yeah,
you
you
said it
you
right.
fanboyed all over me on our first conversation. You made a point to correct me and don't call him Jamie Farr, say Long of Nose, which is what Chuck always called him. So I know I'm talking to a fan here. So this should be fun.
Okay, but see, as a fan, then I'm giving my stamp of approval on this book because I could not stop reading. There is so much that is interesting here. So, you get into some of the history of shows that came before the Gong Show, but let's talk about Chuck. Was there a more fascinating guy than Chuck Barris?
He was a really curious guy. Chuck Barris was a guy who made his living in game shows and made a fortune in game shows, and one of the most successful packagers of all time of game shows, despite the fact that by his own admission, he really didn't like game shows. He had been an ABC network executive in charge of daytime programming. And as a daytime executive in that era, a lot of your business was game shows, and Chuck could not stand the game shows that they were doing. So he was generally tasked with, trying to decide which ones to put on the air. He wasn't happy with them, so he stopped working as an executive. He turned in his resignation and launched his own independent production company and came up with all of these games that were very, very basic ideas that took very, very little explanation and very little creativity to explain, but would produce these results that were so different from things that you saw on other game shows. Like, for example, the dating game. Very basic idea. You have a woman and you have three guys sitting on the other side of a partition so she can't see them. And she asks a series of questions to figure out which one she wants to go on a date with. Or the newlywed game. Ask questions to a husband, ask questions to a wife, make them personal questions, and see who matches answers. And the responses that they triggered, whether it was funny responses or angry responses or nervous or clumsy or awkward, just the fact that all of these games were designed to pull back the facade of human behavior and actually reveal who people really were and actually reveal how they really felt and what they were really thinking about subjects that they did not discuss with their friends. It was very different television and very bold television and very unusual television. And so Chuck comes up with this idea to do a talent show, and he initially wants to make it a big search for the stars. Basically, we're going to find America's next great superstar, America's next great singer, whatever. And the auditions were so bad initially when he first decided to put together a core group of contestants to shoot a pilot. It was so awful that he just called off the idea. And then he was at a hockey game one night with Chris Beard, a writer who had been on variety shows in the 70s, like the Sonny and Cher Hour. And Chris Beard said, well, why don't you just change it so that's the point of the show? Make it a showcase for bad talent. And Chuck said, okay, that's an idea. So they shot a pilot in San Francisco. It was the most poorly received pilot in the history of daytime television. The NBC's head of daytime programming later said it got just about the worst reaction from focus groups of anything I had ever seen in my life. And honestly, the reason that Madeline David, this head of programming who said that, the reason she put it on the air pretty much amounted to morbid curiosity. She said the focus groups that screened the pilot hated it so much that she said, I kind of want to see what happens if we actually air this show. So, yeah, morbid curiosity was what got the Gong Show on the air.
Well, I want to get to the Gong Show, but I just want to say something too. You talk about that time as an executive. So he would take the train, you tell me, because I learned everything I know from you, to Philadelphia, and he'd have that 90 minutes so he could think about things. And then talk a little bit too about his entrepreneurial spirit, how he ends up writing a song that becomes a hit song.
Yeah, Chuck's early break in network television, he had been a page at NBC. They put him in a management training program, and then they did an odd thing. They just immediately laid him off from the network after training him to be an executive. So he had all this experience and he had all this knowledge now. So he got a job at ABC right away. And the payola scandal had just happened, where there were rumors about people taking bribes to play certain songs on the air. And so Chuck was in charge of monitoring American Bandstand, and he was in charge of just keeping an eye on Dick Clark for 8 hours a day. and making sure he didn't do anything unethical. And Chuck pointed out later it was the stupidest job ever because, the idea is to watch Dick Clark and make sure he's not doing anything unethical, but he has set hours. He has to watch Dick Clark between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. to make sure he's not doing anything bad. So if Dick Clark is doing anything not okay, he can just do it at 6:15 p.m. and he'll be fine. So Chuck just immediately deduced that this was a pointless job. He didn't take it all that seriously. He had to fill out a report at the end of every day describing what he had seen around the studio, which was nothing. He was rather certain that the people he answered to at ABC weren't even reading the reports. But in Chuck's mind, this was a do-nothing job. It was a pointless job. There was just nothing for him. Well, he was taking a 90-minute commute every day because ABC was based in New York and Bandstand was set in Philadelphia. That was a 90-minute train ride both ways. So Chuck was taking the train 90 minutes. And you have a lot of time to yourself to just daydream or think or sleep. And one day, Chuck just had an idea for a song. It was called, he called it Amusement Park. And he jotted down the lyrics and showed it to representatives for Freddie Boom Boom Cannon. And they liked it, but they didn't like the title, so they changed it to Palisades Park, which was the specific park that inspired Chuck to write the song because it was in New Jersey. And so they sold the song to Freddie Boom Boom Cannon, and Chuck had a songwriting credit, which gave ABC a tantrum because we put you in charge of making sure that nothing is happening with the business dealings in American Bandstand, and you just made a business deal with people at American Bandstand. Like, that's absolutely a conflict of interest, Chuck. But
would you expect anything else out of Chuck? I love that. It adds to his character. Okay, so the San Francisco disaster, not a good representation of what the show would be. Then what happens?
So they shot a very strange pilot for the Gong Show in San Francisco. It was because shooting it in San Francisco was going to be cheaper than shooting it in Los Angeles, and they had to be. The studio they used, they had to be out of the studio and done with the show by 10 o'clock because the studio had to set up for the 11 o'clock news after they were done. So they shot this pilot in San Francisco. All of the networks hated what they were seeing, but they managed to sell the show in syndication, where you're selling the show to individual stations, and they sold it to enough stations that they knew they could get it on the air as a once-a-week nighttime show. The Gong Show was originally going to air only once a week in nighttime with Gary Owens as host. And then Madeline David suddenly takes over at NBC. Lynn Bolan, who was a notorious figure in daytime television. The big story about Lynn Bolan is if you ever see the movie Network, the character that Faye Dunaway plays is based on Lynn Bolan. So that's your frame of reference if you need one. Lynn Bolan left the network. She was replaced by Madeline David, who was kind of an advocate for the Gong Show. And she said, let's put this on daytime for 5 days a week, because Madeline didn't dislike game shows, but she looked at the daytime lineup and she said, everything we put on the air is a game show or a soap opera, game show, soap opera, game show, soap opera. And she just wanted to put on some other genre of television to see if it worked as a daytime show. So Chuck Barris was developing this thing that's not really a game show, but it's different enough. It's a talent show. And she said, let's put that on and see if it works. And boy, did it, because it was just this alien environment for a show like this to exist in. And the Gong Show on its own merit was a show that just did not fit in anywhere. It's a cliche to say there was nothing like it on television, but there was nothing like this on television. It was the Gong Show and nothing else like it that you could compare it to.
Well, you mentioned Gary Owens, and we're here to sell books, by the way, not just to give away the whole book. So if you want to know why Gary Owens doesn't last, you have to read the book and find out.
That's right. Gong This Book, now on sale on Amazon and at barnesandnoble.com.
I wish there was a chime we could play when we plug the book. So Chuck becomes host.
Yeah.
If you want to explain a little bit of how that happens, please do.
So initially another host was hired, a local TV personality in Los Angeles, and they did advertise the Gong Show with this other host. They did publicity stills with them. They did early advertisements. For the TV guide collectors out there, if you have your TV guide from the week that the Gong Show premiered, it's a photo of a different host in the advertisement for the Gong Show. And what happened was he taped 5 episodes and he didn't get it. What you're seeing the Gong Show hosted by a typical game show host, for lack of a better words. He's just a very normal, very typical broadcaster. Typical is the only way to put it. And typical was not the correct fit for what Chuck wanted this show to be. And Chuck was trying to give him instructions about what he had in mind for the host role on this show. The guy wasn't getting it. And so Chuck fires him after he's taped 5 episodes. And Chuck goes to NBC and says, we've taped 5 episodes, but I'm going to be honest with you, we can't air them. They're not good. And he said, we need a new host. I'm going to find another host by the time the next taping starts. And Madeline David understood his concerns, but she said, if what you have in mind is that specific, rather than find another host, you need to do it yourself. And Chuck was a songwriter. He worked in television, but Chuck was not a television performer by any stretch of the imagination. This man was not qualified to be a television performer. But Madeline David said, if that's really how you feel, if you need somebody to give that specific a performance, you need to host it yourself. And Chuck kind of demurred and said, no, I can't do it myself. And she said, you have to host it yourself or else we don't air this show.
Wow. And so by the way, if you want to know who that host was that was fired after 5, if I could pick up a book, what was the book that would tell me who that guy was?
The book would be Gong This Book by Adam Nedeff. It's now available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Insert your ching sound here.
By the way, your plugs are getting stronger as we go on. I can't wait until we near the end of this. All right. So when does it take off? When do people discover the Gong Show and say, this Chuck Barris is incredible?
Pretty much right away. It got a lot of people's attention immediately. There was one review from a critic very, very early on who, and I'm paraphrasing, but you'll see the exact review in the book. But his review was something like, it's puerile, it's stupid, it's obnoxious, it's tacky, it's crass, and I wouldn't miss an episode if my house was on fire. It was something different every day. It was something completely weird and unexpected. And the first few episodes had a certain magic to it that the show lost as it went along. I love the Gong Show all the way through. But one of the staffers who worked on the show, Jamie Klein, made this point about how when the Gong Show first went on the air, what made it so fascinating was, where did these people come from? He said in year 4, it doesn't have that mystique about it because obviously these people are people who came up with their acts to be on the Gong Show. They created the act for that purpose. And you watched the show and understood it. What was so weird about the first few weeks, the first few months of the show, was these people were doing very skilled performances of bizarre avant-garde things. A guy was coming out in an inner tube and just pouring flour and dumping eggs on himself. And that was his act. And you just watch that, and the show has only been on the air for a couple of weeks, and it's like, okay, so they just found a guy who does this. And, the big shock was learning that many of them were professionals. They were not people who had just come up with that. They were people who did these acts in nightclubs or in other venues and just came on the show to do their bizarre things that they had been doing for little money in these smaller venues.
Okay, then some regulars turn up who also turn out to be staff members. You've got Larry. I'm going to play my shoe. What you going to do? I'm going
to this was something that David Letterman became famous for later, but Chuck Barris really did it first. Chuck would just look at his employees and think, I'm going to make something of these people. The Gong Show had a strange problem that was unique from other shows. You have a 90-second time limit for the acts. That was the time limit that all the acts had. It had to top out in a minute and a half. The panelists had to wait 45 seconds to bang the gong. So you could schedule a number of acts to fill a half hour. But the problem is, if your first 2 acts get gonged, that now leaves you with a 90-second hole in the show. That was the problem. You couldn't consistently schedule the timing of the Gong Show because you didn't know how many acts would get gonged. So Chuck's solution to this was he began finding stuff for his employees to do on the air. You just mentioned Larry and his magic, which was a running joke. Larry Spencer, who was the joke writer that Chuck hired to write all of his introductions for the acts, Larry Spencer would come out and do a repetitive, obnoxious song called I'm Gonna Play My... What are you going to do? And it was just one lyric that he sang over and over again and build it up and build it up and build it up. And there were 1 or 2 key changes, and he would just sing the song over and over and over again. And then when he finally played the instrument, it would break on contact and they would shut the curtain on him. And that was it. another staff member would come out, Ruthie the stripper, and the joke was she would strip, and then a security guard who worked at NBC would come on stage and voice some kind of objection and some kind of rule that had to be obeyed for her to be able to do a striptease. And so she would do her act behind a screen or something like that. Other employees, there was one called the Brothers Vert, which I always liked, which was the band leader Milton DeLugg and two of the behind the scenes staffers would play music using the zippers on their pants. And the act would end when one of them hurt himself. And so that was that gag. Yeah.
All right. But you know what? You have to pick this book up because Scarlett and Rhett, Father Ed, of course, the great Gene the Dancing Machine. We'll talk about him in a second. But you're right. These were all employees that you told me I didn't even know. Like, who was Father Ed? He was somebody who worked for Chuck.
Not for Chuck. He was the NBC head carpenter. His name was Ed Holland. And what's crazy about this, if you're like me and if you're a psychopath who actually reads the credits on TV shows, you can go back in these 1970s TV shows and read the credits now and think to yourself, oh, that's a person from the Gong Show. That's a person from the Gong Show. That's a person from the Gong Show. Father Ed was the head carpenter for NBC, so he was in charge of putting up the set every day. The way television works is you build your set in the studio, you do your taping, and then you tear it down because another show is using the same set and is using the same studio the next day. So Father Ed was tasked with putting up the set each day, but the thing is, once you put up the set, you're kind of done for the day. There's nothing else to do. So Chuck got him fitted for a priest outfit and had him play Father Ed. The entire shtick with Father Ed was he would give these what Chuck called pithy thoughts, which made absolutely no sense. They were complete non sequitur jokes. So, yeah, it was all these people that Chuck would give camera time to as a way of filling time for the show. But there was this other incredibly generous added bonus to it, which was union rules. You're required to pay somebody extra if they're a union member and they appear on camera. And it's basically any union. So Father Ed would get bonuses in his paycheck, and Scarlett and Rhett got bonuses in their paycheck. Scarlett and Rhett were the makeup man and the wardrobe man, and they would get bonuses in their paycheck. So all these people would get these little bonuses every time they were on the show. But also beyond that, Chuck was obligated to pay royalties to them if the show ever got sold into reruns, which it was. So all of these folks got these gigantic windfalls when Chuck sold the show into reruns, and everyone just talked about how amazed they were by the size of the giant checks that they just got out of nowhere once the show got sold into reruns, because Chuck was obligated to do that. Now, Chuck did not have to do that. Chuck could have found a professional who could have played multiple characters to fill time. Chuck could have done something. But no, he did this incredible thing that set everybody up who worked for him with a little extra money.
Well, and you told me of a rumor about Gene, because for me, Gene was the most beloved. How could you not watch that and love it? The second I hear doom, 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 I'm happy.
Gene had been a high school janitor, and Gene got hired at NBC, and this sounds blunt, but it's really the way the story goes. Gene was a diversity hire. There was a big problem with basically only whites getting hired to become stagehands and join the union. And so the hammer was brought down, and the union was told, you have to hire minorities to be in your union and to be stagehands on shows. And Gene was one of the first people hired under that new edict. And Gene was hired to be a stagehand on the Gong Show. And no, I shouldn't say that. Gene was a stagehand who was assigned to the Gong Show, because you're not really hired specifically that way. Mm-hmm. So Gene was working the show one day, and Milton DeLugg's band was playing a song during one of the taping stoppages, and Chuck looks over and he sees Gene just kind of dancing to himself while holding his push broom. And Chuck just looked at him and just thought to himself, I got to put that on the show. So he brought him on the show. He was Gene and his magic feet the first time he appeared on the show. And then Larry Spencer, who we just talked about, came up with the name Gene the Dancing Machine. And Gene became this star who appeared on the show regularly. There was no set schedule to anybody's appearances, but Gene, I would say, appeared more than any of the others. And all it was, Gene would just come out and dance for 2 minutes while people pelted him with garbage to try to make him fall down. Gene never did. Sometimes his hat would get knocked out of place, but Gene never lost a step getting stuff thrown at him while he was dancing. And became a star from that. And again, he was obligated to get bonuses every time he did that on camera. And again, Chuck was required to pay him royalties when he sold the show into reruns. So this was unconfirmed. I couldn't make contact with his family. There were a lot of people that I wanted to make contact for this book, and I didn't have luck tracking them down. Um, but I the rumor that a lot of people at the Gong Show heard was that Gene had put his kids through college using just the money that he got from the Gong Show bonuses without touching any of the money that he and his wife had in the bank otherwise.
I love it. A quick aside,
Yeah.
Adam. I was backstage at the Tonight Show to interview Jay Leno, and I'm heading there, and I look, and there's Gene, the dancing machine. I went over and talked to him. He was so wonderful and friendly. It's like he was everything you hoped he would be. I love Gene. That's...
People really like Gene, and beyond the Gong Show, there's kind of a coda to his story that's forgotten now, I think. But the interesting thing was the Gong Show came to an end in 1980, and then after the Gong Show would run its course, Johnny Carson kind of adopted Gene because after the Gong Show was done, you began seeing Gene as a character in Johnny Carson's sketches. He never danced on the show. Well, no, I'll take that back because I actually did see that. He didn't do the Gene dancing machine shtick, but he would appear in sketches on the Tonight Show. Johnny began using him himself for April Fool's Day one year. It was Gene who came through the curtain when Ed called out, "Here's Johnny." Or they did a sketch called Dictator Follies one night where they had Gene playing Idi Amin in the sketch. But yeah, Gene had a second life to his fame. After the Gong Show ran its course, he was on the Tonight Show periodically with Johnny Carson, and people loved him. He had that vibe, he had that atmosphere about him. There was just something about him that you liked.
Okay, Three Stooges connection. The woman who introduced the show was in one of the Three Stooges movies. Sivvy
Auberg, who was in and I read about this movie last night. She was in a horror movie, and it was the last movie that Moe ever did. It was 1973. Please tell me the title of this, because this is going to drive me crazy.
I don't remember the title, but
yeah,
in Moe's book, there's a picture of him with her.
Yeah, right towards the end of Moe Howard's life, he had a cameo in a horror movie. And Stevie Auberg is in the movie, and they did a publicity photo together. So there's this weird photo of Stevie, the woman who introduced Chuck Barris at the opening of the Gong Show, standing next to Moe, and she's towering over Moe. Moe was a very short man. So yeah, that's your weird Three Stooges connection. Also, if you're aware of the replacement Stooges after Ted Healy had his falling out with the Stooges, Paul Mousy Garner was on the nighttime version with Gary Owens a few times. And he was basically the guy in charge of throwing the confetti, as Jerry Marin from The Wizard of Oz was on the daytime show.
All right, stop there. Jerry Marin was a friend of mine, and we never talked about the Gong Show. I don't know how I missed that. How did that happen? How does CV happen? How does Jerry happen? Then a porn star starts introducing stuff. Where does this all come from?
Yeah, they all just appeared. CV was a model on one of Chuck's other shows. CV was a model on The New Treasure Hunt. So she was basically already in the building, not literally in the building, but she was already known, and I'm sure that Chuck liked her, so he gave her another job. You're talking about the adult film star, Carol Connors is her name.
Yes.
And she was on the show as a contestant, and they just kept putting her on the show in the same capacity. Occasionally, she would be the one to introduce Chuck. So yes, Carol Connors was this adult film star who was on the show quite often.
All right, let's leave it at that.
Yeah.
Okay, you talked to important people from the show. You talked to Joanne Worley and the great long of nose Jamie Farr.
Jamie Farr, I'm grateful to the people who helped me make contact with these folks, but Jamie Farr and Joanne Worley both gave interviews, and both had very different memories about it, because Joanne's memory was she was basically one of the first celebrities to decide, "Ooh, this makes me uncomfortable," and bow out of being on the show. She was on the show the first few weeks, and she said, it's fun to bang the gong. There were a lot of contestants who wanted to be gonged on that show. They came up with intentionally bad acts to be part of the fun and be part of the zaniness and be silly. And she said, when you got the vibe that somebody wanted to be gonged, I was happy to do that. I banged the gong and insulted them and sent them on their way. And she said there were other times where somebody came on the show who genuinely thought they were talented and was genuinely trying hard and genuinely wanted this to be their big break in show business. And they were so bad. And you saw this person trying their heart out and the audience was booing them. Oh. And she said, in moments like that, it didn't feel fun anymore. So I told my agent I didn't want to be on the show anymore. And on the other hand, you had Jamie Farr, who really did get into the spirit of the show. And Jamie Farr actually takes a little credit, and Chuck seemed to corroborate this when he was asked about it later in life. But Jamie Farr was responsible for a little bit of the flavor of the show, because the first 5 episodes that Chuck taped with the other host were pretty different. I got a chance to screen some of the episodes from that unaired week, and it doesn't feel right. There are a few elements that are off. And Jamie Farr's big contribution was he was the one that told Chuck, have everyone in formal wear. Because if you watch a 70s game show, that's the way everyone is dressed for the unaired week of the Gong Show. It's leisure suits and nice looking dresses. And the band is wearing, for some reason, orange and white striped suits. I don't know why they thought that would be a good look for the band, but they're wearing orange and white striped suits. And Jamie Farr said, it's funny when you have crap, it's funnier to have crap in a nice looking package. So he said, if the whole show is going to be about bad looking acts, everyone should be in formal wear because it's funnier to look at that way. And so Chuck took that note. And so that's where that idea came from. It was Jamie Farr's idea for the show to have everyone in formal wear.
Love it. Love it. Okay. So there is so much in this book. We're not going to get to it, but I encourage you, if you love the Gong Show at all, we see the rise and sadly the fall, and the Gong Show movie and other incarnations. By the way, that Mike Myers, you need Chuck. You know, you can't do this show without Chuck.
Yeah.
But Adam, I can't thank you enough for this book. There is so much in it. You talked to, well, of course, the Wizard of Whoopee, the unknown comic.
The unknown comic was gracious enough to grant me an interview, and I was deeply grateful to him. And still got it. I really, I'll tell you this about when I called him on the phone. I called him on the phone and I asked, "Is this Murray Langston?" And he says, "Well, hold on, I write my name on my underwear. Let me make sure. Murray Fruit of the Loom. Yeah, that's me." So, yeah, the unknown comic is still the unknown comic after all these years.
Unbelievable. Milton DeLug and the band with the thug. It's all in this book. I'm telling you, I have no financial stake in this. Buy Adam's book. You will not be disappointed. I can't thank you enough for taking the time.
Thank you.
All right, Adam.